Welcome to Stat Masters, where we teach you how to use Player Profiler to win at fantasy football and better evaluate players. My name is Aaron Stewart, and I'm a senior analyst for Player Profiler. My co-host is Chris Bonagura, a fantasy intelligence network analyst for Player Profiler. And joining us today is the Player Profiler Director of Analytics, Dario Ofstein. Dario, please tell the audience a little bit about yourself and what you do for Player Profiler.
What's up, everyone? I'm Dario. I'm the director of analytics. Basically, it's my job to make sure that the site has all the data correct, like during the season, updating it. I mean, I don't know if you guys remember in the Discord last season, but it's like on Tuesday, I get to send that at everyone message when all the stats are loaded up on all the player pages, having one more week's worth of data, and also our rankings. I have a big hand in, so seasonal rankings, FFPC rankings, Dynasty rankings, however it is. And then there's always, projects going on in the background. If you guys are using the Win Now, Win Later Dynasty tool, that's something that I had a big hand in. And then Injury Finder, Breakout Finder, anything that is Roto Underworld and data, I've pretty much had something to do with it over the last year and a half now.
So basically there is no Stat Masters without Dario and his hard work. And also basically he's done a lot more than either Aaron or I. We mostly just sit here and whine about player ADP on this podcast, but we all have a great time. Dario, your efforts are much appreciated, and I would love to see them, your analytics based approach sprinkled into what we're talking about today. And we're going to start with talking about Javonte Williams, a player who me and Aaron are looking at revisiting one player each week. This is a guy I've been fading up until this point because of concerns of injury, who now is not starting the offseason on PUP. He's skipping PUP for training camp, which is huge news. So we need to adjust, but what price are you willing to pay for Javonte Williams? Because all the injury risk is still alive. So my question, Dario and Aaron, would be, If there were no injury concern whatsoever, zero injury concern, we know Javonte Williams fully healthy week one, what do we realistically think his range of outcomes is?
I think that we could probably expect him. I think even though if he starts healthy week one, there's a very real chance, and I would frankly expect that the Broncos are still not going to just immediately give him the full workload that he might see later on in the year. I think that first few weeks probably temper expectations and projections around like a mid-range RB2. But I mean, there's a reason we were all excited about him last year. His profile's elite. His missed tackle stats are incredible. So, I mean, and the way he was using the receiving game last year while he was healthy, the targets that he was getting were insane from Russell Wilson. Unclear how much that'll hold up with Sean Payton, but it's really encouraging because Sean Payton has targeted running backs like crazy. I mean, you think of Reggie Bush, you think of Darren Sproles, you think of Alvin Kamara, these elite receiving backs on the Saints, and the amount of targets that they were getting. So I think that, like I said, mid-range RB2 would be my expectations for him week one if he's healthy. But I wouldn't be surprised if he's someone that is being projected as a mid-range RB1 by the end of the season when it comes down to it.
It's tough because we have the injury-shortened season last year, but he's played 21 career games. He's finished as a top 24 running back 8 times. And a good chunk of that career, of course, was splitting work with Melvin Gordon, but he does also have 4 top 10 weeks in fantasy football at the running back position. So, yeah, he would be this high-end RB2 if he was completely healthy. If there was his knees torn of multiple ligaments, like he would be probably a 4th-round pick in best ball would be my guess. Maybe sneaks into the 3rd round. But what's kind of nice is that that's not the price that you have to pay for him. In fact, he's going as RB28 and ADP, just inside the top 90 overall for the obvious reason of going. He tore his ACL and his MCL. And at the time of this recording, he did not start off training camp on the PUP, which is fantastic news for Javonte Williams. And, the cost hasn't really scared me that much. I'm not reaching for Javonte Williams. My exposure has just been 5% on him. But those drafts that I'm in where other people are terrified of Javonte Williams and they let him fall, I will snatch him up. 6 picks, 7 picks below ADP. yeah, I'll take a risk. It's an 8th round pick. And look at the guys, not just running backs, but wide receivers, tight ends. Look at the guys that are going in the 8th round. None of those guys really have the upside of what we have with Javonte Williams. You do have to embrace the uncertainty. Chris Godwin last season tore his ACL and MCL. Fading Chris Godwin last season made more sense because he was expensive. He was a 5th round pick. That's a pretty big opportunity cost. But 8th round Javonte Williams, I haven't had a problem with him.
So I would say this, though, in terms of the cost, he's already firmly entrenched in the mid 7th round, and I wouldn't be shocked to find him in the 6th round by 3rd week of August. So it becomes a question of what's the actual upside, because like Dario said, you still have the injury risk. He skipped PUP, but we even saw like Chris Godwin skipped the PUP, was well ahead of his timeline, and had that rough September, and he plays receiver, a less demanding position. I can appreciate what Dario said about target totals. As we know, receptions are very valuable. And Aaron, you're right. In his rookie season production, he had that one wide receiver 1 overall game in RB1 overall in week 13 against Kansas City. And he really did it on the back of just massive volume and 9 targets to go with 23 carries. I don't even see that he had any. Oh, he had 1 touchdown. So I guess the question is like last season, he was being drafted at the back half of the 2nd round. So we considered him a really good player, but you could argue that even before the injury, those first 4 weeks of 2022, he was falling very short of that price tag. Week 1, he got a monster target share, which didn't happen again for 3 more weeks. And we kind of got robbed of what is the real range of outcomes here, because then he got hurt. So we had this month that, it's a short sample, so you can't do much with it. But if you extrapolate this month over the season and even beneficially give him better production, would he still have been a 2nd round pick? Probably not. So the question is so what about this? Like Dario, would you rather have last offseason Javonte Williams or current offseason Kenneth Walker? Like, which do you think would be going higher in drafts?
I mean, I think that they kind of experienced opposite off seasons in that go after their rookie year, because Javonte Williams, you saw the Broncos let Melvin Gordon walk, and then the Seahawks did practically the opposite by drafting Charbonnet in the 2nd round. And that's why there is that ADP difference, right? I mean, like you said, Javonte, end of the 2nd round last year, Kenneth Walker, 5th round this year. I think hindsight is really easy when we're looking at what the Broncos did last year. I mean, just when hearing you talk about those disappointing weeks for Javonte before he got hurt in week 4, I mean, it's just, we have to put ourselves back in the mindset of the expectations that everyone in the fantasy community had for that Broncos offense and just how incredibly short of those they fell. I think without the benefit of hindsight, you still are taking Javonte Williams going into last year as opposed to Kenneth Walker coming into this year.
And that's an excellent point. That's honestly, that makes perfect sense. And it's part of the reason why I'm trying to now buy Javonte Williams. There's certainly buyer's remorse, because I think the logical approach was and still is to be skeptical of the injury. The problem is, the way people react. The positive injury news means that the price tag he had was warranted and would now be a much more comfortable price tag of that late 8th round, early 9th round. But now everyone, what do? They jump him up now to another tier up where the expectation raises. And in order to take him on that price tag, if he's in the 6th or 7th round, and he's already in the 7th round, he needs to have back end RB1 upside to take the risk really with the knee injury, or at least high end RB2. It sounds like maybe you guys are confident he can. I mean, I certainly think there's a world where he can, especially because the Broncos seem to think that all they've added is Samaje Perine, and that's been the whole offseason. And I mean, you look at the rookie season, he had 53 targets. That's a ton. His juke rate was really nice. He had a lot of evaded tackles. His yards created per touch were top 10. He definitely did really well, despite not necessarily dominating that backfield, number 26 in dominator rating. But I think we all think he's capable of dominating. So I think this might just be a situation where Javonte Williams is going to be somewhere where I've just done poorly this offseason. I didn't get him at better value. And even if I take him now, there's probably an upside case. But that window is sailed for, I guess, anyone who is fading.
I think that his ADP is probably going to climb into the late 5th. It seems
that's fair.
I mean, it's only like 2 rounds ahead of where he's going now. When I last updated our best ball rankings on PlayerProfiler.com, his ADP was 89. Today it's 86. That's 2 days. He's gone up 3 spots in ADP. I think that trend easily continues. We saw J.K. Dobbins settle in the late 5th last year, and I think that in some way the J.K. Dobbins situation last year is scaring people off Javonte, but I think that it's pretty realistic that he ends up in that same territory. I mean, guys going around there right now. I mean, J.K. Dobbins again, of course, but there's a bit of a gap in the running backs in that tier. I think that that's a very realistic place where he might land. And if you're drafting this week, next week, you should definitely try to get your exposures up because I think he's only going to keep climbing.
I agree with that. And I think that's a good final take. If you can still get him in the 7th round, now's the time. Once he gets past that 7th round, there really is no more value left because there's still too much injury risk and re-injury risk. We should move on. Today, we are talking about the NFC East. We've already covered the North and the South. And we're going to basically just break down one player from each NFC team and their kind of where we've been on them in best ball and how that may have changed. So I recently did a study, or at least Billy, who we had on the show last week, went through my ADPs for Best Ball Mania and made these really cool visuals for them that he posted on his Twitter. And one thing I guess I just didn't realize, I've drafted 100 Best Ball Mania 4 teams. I have not drafted Terry McLaurin a single time, which is weird. He's a very talented player, but he's a mid 4th round pick. I almost never see him past the mid 4th round. He typically goes in like the early 40s. Is just like Javonte, is that going to come back and haunt me? Or do you think a lower exposure to Terry is reasonable? Dario, what do you think?
I don't think it's unreasonable at all. I'm pretty concerned about the potential upside for this Commanders offense. It's still kind of weird saying the Commanders, but they're just, I think that people have a little bit too high hopes for Sam Howell. I mean, we definitely are telling people to draft him. I think there's some upside there, but I think in the grand scheme of things, this offense is not very likely to turn into one of the best in the league, obviously. And I think that the defense in Washington is going to be like really good. That they basically were top 5 in a lot of stats last year, except turnovers, and turnovers are the one thing that regress the most and tend to be the flukiest. So I think that the defense is going to keep this team in games. And then between Howell and Jacoby Brissett, I think it's going to be tough to see either of those guys bring too much upside to this offense. I mean, Terry McLaurin was obviously really brought down by Carson Wentz last year and did better in the games with Taylor Heineke. But I think that there's just going to be not that much juice to squeeze from this offense. And I think fading Terry in the 4th round is pretty rational.
Terry McLaurin is one that he's got a massive fan club, but he never really seems to do it in fantasy football. Like, he's one of those, I would say, a better NFL wide receiver than fantasy. And the interesting thing is just looking at ADP. Of course, 4for4 has this awesome tool where you can track ADPs. And I looked at Terry McLaurin's ADP 1 year ago to today. Last year, his ADP was 39.3, just inside the top 40. Today, as we record, his ADP is 44.5. It's almost identical to last season. But the other thing is there's a trend with Terry McLaurin that is concerning. These past 3 seasons, we've seen his target share go from 25.4% to 24.5% to this last season going to 22.6%. And a big part of that, too, is Terry McLaurin has got a legit starting wide receiver next to him this year in Jahan Dotson, who last year, an underdog, was going as pick 139, and now his ADP is 73.1. It's a massive jump. Even Curtis Samuel, who was forgotten about last year, was going as pick 188. He's still kind of forgotten about, but it's gone up to 173. So To me, this doesn't make a whole lot of sense of how is a wide receiver that's been outside the top 20 in best ball points added in each of his seasons in the NFL, and his ADP is currently the same as last year. Like, what are we expecting when we draft Terry McLaurin? There's more target competition in terms of talented target competition in Jahan Dotson. I just don't want Terry McLaurin. Do I have him? Sure. I've got like 5% exposure to McLaurin, and some of that's just due to the amount of drafts you do. Sometimes you go, oh, I haven't drafted this guy. I won't be adding more exposure to Terry McLaurin, but I've got a whole lot more Jahan Dotson, and some of that is just going at the opportunity cost of taking Terry McLaurin over all the players going around him. Like, McLaurin's not helping you truly win in tournament formats. He's a nice guy. He'll have his week, sure, but he hasn't been a difference maker in fantasy football, and I don't see why that's going to change in 2023.
Yeah, everyone loves Terry. No one thinks he's an untalented player. One of the best receivers in the NFL. Madden seems to think he's top 5 receiver in the NFL. However much that is worth. But 4 seasons outside the top 20 in PPR points per game, despite very impressive target and reception numbers. So pretty much hindered by touchdown production. I don't think the switch to half PPR puts him higher. And then, like Aaron said, the target shares are good, but not necessarily dominant. Now, he does run a ton of routes, and he's been on bad offenses, and he earns a ton of deep targets, 94 deep targets last year with good yards after the catch, right? This is an explosive player with an all-around football skill set, 29 targets. You know, it didn't update, but let's see. We'll go the year before. It's being a little slow today. 29 targets the year before. Or no, let's see, 21. It's not loading, but if you go back, I assure you, a lot of deep targets. Certain aspects of his game, though, for whatever reason, doesn't necessarily dominate volume, doesn't dominate target share. And this is in previous years, like Aaron said, with less target competition. And then there's always the argument of, well, in the first 4 to 6 rounds, you typically just need to take stabs at everyone, because what separates these guys most typically is touchdowns or injuries around them, which we can't necessarily predict. Yeah, we can group guys and say, like, hey, these 5 guys have a lead upside, but if one of them gets hurt, you were wrong. So there's still a floor, but he's being drafted closer to his ceiling, I would say. And like Aaron said, there's more competition. And then there's always the, hey, if this is the guy that pops off in the final weeks of the season, then this is the guy you wanted to have regardless of his cost, because that's what actually wins you the tournament. But the last 2 weeks of the season, Washington plays the Jets and the 49ers. So I'm not one to like look at late schedules and say I for sure know how these games are going to go, because that's a ludicrous thing to say. But if we're going to put a tiebreaker in any direction, that's certainly tougher defensive coverage units for Terry. We don't know how good Sam Howell is. Now, my 0% in 100 drafts is certainly irresponsible, but it sounds like we're all in general agreement that at the price tag of 4th round, taking him above elite quarterbacks like Joe Burrow, Justin Herbert, Justin Fields, you're taking him a lot of times when these players fall above high upside running backs like Najee Harris and Jahmyr Gibbs and Travis Etienne. I've seen Terry go before those guys. Other receivers who are basically just as talented, but on far better offenses, Christian Kirk, Mike Williams. It's tough. It's a tough selection to make, which is why I've never done it.
And before we move on to the New York Giants, let's hear a message from the Podfather.
Hey, it's the Podfather of great news. The 2023 Draft Kit is live. It is world famous. Why? Because it is the best resource for winning fantasy football championships that exists. There are rankings and cheat sheets for every format you can imagine. We have projections both at the team level and the player level. And wherever you are, you can click on a player, open them up, and see in-depth written analysis about what to expect in fantasy football from that player this year. And then you can click on the team, and you can get even more in-depth analysis, all the drivers of fantasy production, both in a positive and negative direction for that team, including a signature trend. And the graphics are incredible. So these team insights, they give you the team level projections, the vacated targets, the vacated areas, and that one dynamic for each team that you need to know when making decisions on draft day. And we added a bunch of features. I mean, individual cheat sheets for Theo and Billy and Dario. So you could take your favorite analyst and download their personal draft cheat sheet And then in the commissioners section, also brand new this year, Memphis Young lays out everything you need to know to manage a league, do's, don'ts, tips, and what the more innovative fantasy commissioners are doing this year. That's presented by Trophy Smack. The whole package is presented by the Fantasy Football Players Championship, the FFPC, Ray Garvin, Derek Brown, the best minds in the industry contributing analysis. It's certainly not the most inexpensive draft kit on the market, but it is the best. PlayerProfiler.com/draft kit. PlayerProfiler.com/draft kit. Go get it.
Welcome back to Stat Masters. As we continue our journey through the NFC East, the New York Giants is our next team. And the question is very simple. Is Daniel Jones a good pick at his current cost on Underdog? Dario, what's your thoughts on Daniel Jones?
I think that he's kind of just, he's not sexy, but he was the quarterback 10 last year in points per game, as you can see here on Chris's screen. And I think that his passing game that we saw last year is really only going to improve based on the fact that they added Darren Waller into another year under Brian Daboll's system. I think Brian Daboll is probably a top 5 offensive head coach in the league. Like, just from what he was able to do with turning around Josh Allen, I was surprised it took him as long as it did to get a head coaching job. And he immediately helped Daniel Jones lower his turnover rate. They were, getting, like you said, you're looking at the receivers right now over there, and they got some production out of some real nobodies last year. So I think that there's a very good case to make that he's a value. It's just that he's not as sexy as those guys going ahead of him. I mean, you see these other quarterbacks that are currently being drafted ahead of him, and it's like, well, of course. I mean, we'd rather have Anthony Richardson and, Kirk Cousins. I mean, I think I'd take Daniel Jones over Kirk Cousins this year. And then, but Dak and Tua, I mean, very big upside cases there. Obviously, Deshaun Watson, game-breaking ceiling. So it's. I think he's priced about right. I think the Giants are a good sneaky team to target with stacks. And I especially think, part of the concern for that offense has been the Saquon holdout, and that concern has now been completely relieved. So I think that I'm even more comfortable drafting Daniel Jones now than I was 3 days ago.
I agree 100%. I think the value among quarterbacks is fine. I think you bring up good points about who he goes around. To a degree, it doesn't really make sense to take Anthony Richardson before Daniel Jones when his rookie season ceiling is probably similar. He definitely rushes for more if he plays every game, but we'll see. Like you said, he's been quietly good, getting better each season. QB 29, QB 17, QB 10. His metrics have gotten better. His completion percentage, he threw for 3,000 yards last year to the worst receiving room in the league. He got Richie James a contract, who me and Aaron love. He made Isaiah Hodgins. People were drafting whatever the tight end's name was. I don't even remember because he's not a player that's on the radar. And then when you look at the receivers, it's so funny how many they've signed. Everyone makes the joke, but when you actually visualize it the way Player Profiler does, 3 of these guys are going to make up a 3 receiver set that's going to be half decent. They've taken a lot of stabs at this. And then if Waller stays healthy and Barkley stays healthy, there's a lot of upside here. My only issue with Daniel Jones is quarterbacks typically don't necessarily separate from each other. There's a lot of ways to get production from the quarterback position. And the only problem is just the range he goes in. I far too often find myself, I either already have a quarterback or I'm fine waiting longer. And there's so many good last chance for a good running backs in this range. Like, you got to take Daniel Jones over Khalil Herbert's and Brian Robinson's and Rashad Penny's. And for a lot of teams, if you're going wide receiver early, you'd much rather that 10th round running back. So it's not even a fault of his. It's just the fault of ADP is the only reason I'm a little lower exposed. But I'm with you 100%, Dario. Like, I think the value itself, if anything, he's at his floor. So he's probably a great pick.
Daniel Jones proved a lot of haters wrong last season. When he finished as QB 10, the reason he helped you in best ball last season was he was dirt cheap. He was going so late in drafts. So now looking at the ADP, it has corrected. And he does have top 10 upside. And when you go, this is what I'm getting as the QB 14, that's value. But you mentioned it, Chris. There's not a whole lot that truly separates these guys. And for Daniel Jones to be a massive value at his current costs, it's no longer good enough to be, oh, can you be a top 10 quarterback? It's, oh, can you be a top 5 quarterback? Can you be that much of a difference maker? Because you are still giving up some key pieces of your best ball construction. Now, the positive for Daniel Jones isn't just the increase in weaponry. I would say that, honestly, a second season in this offense, a Brian Daboll offense, should lead to improvement, which is pretty scary because he was already the number 1 quarterback in true completion percentage. And a lot of efficiency metrics looked pretty good, especially for Daniel Jones, who going into last season, I don't think a lot of people would have said that this guy's a great quarterback. We knew he could run, but now the problem is with Daniel Jones is going, Chris, you talked about it, that there's guys you can wait and get. This year's Daniel Jones potentially is Kyler Murray, who goes that same round that Daniel Jones was going last year. So you take Daniel Jones, you're like, yes, I got a top 10 QB, but we don't even know if he can replicate it this season. And if he doesn't, you just got egg on your face. I've got some Daniel Jones. I'm not heavily exposed to him. He will technically look like a value, but I question how much of a value he is at his current ADP.
Yeah, it's a lot. Last thing, you would need, he was QB9 in best ball points added last year, but like you said, Aaron, you really want to get top 6 within the top 14. And then, let's not forget the Giants, by Warren Sharp's strength of schedule analysis last year, had the easiest schedule by far. They had the outlier easy schedule. The Saints and Falcons have it this year. And that helped a lot with them achieving these ceilings, make a wild card round, actualize the offense. I'll forgive you, Aaron, for presenting coach-centric analysis when we've banned that on this show. But I don't necessarily buy into the Daboll year 2. And as much as we all love the improvements, there's still a lot of scenarios where this doesn't improve at every level on face value. And you don't necessarily see an overwhelmingly better fantasy finish. You still have an offense that generally runs through its running back. Of your wide receivers, they got rid of all the ones that chemistry was built with. Paris Campbell and Darren Waller are tremendous injury risks. Sterling Shepard and Jameson Crowder may as well not be there. Wan'Dale Robinson is currently injured. Jalen Hyatt's a rookie. Darius Slayton is fringe. And Isaiah Hodgins is fringe. So as much as you can see a lot of upside theoretically that could happen, and I hope it does, I want to see this team come out and Slayton have a career year and Campbell be the slot receiver we know he can be, and Sterling Shepard make a miracle comeback, and Darren Waller stay healthy and compete with Travis Kelce for tight end 1. There's a lot of worlds where that doesn't happen. But moving on to range of outcomes being unpredictable on things we couldn't possibly know, like injury and touchdown variance, let's discuss Dallas Goedert of the Philadelphia Eagles, one of the trickier tight end evaluations because his price is one of the most reasonable it's been in recent years. Tight end 6, 74 overall in ADP, but this is a player that slides. I've gotten Goedert as late as the 9th round. I've seen him go past Evan Engram. I've seen him go past David Njoku at times. He's also a player that I've seen go in the 4th round and 5th round. People are very polarized on him this year. So, I guess, are you guys in or are you out on the Dallas Goedert experience entering, what's his 6th year in the NFL, his 6th year?
Well, I don't know if you scroll back up there a little bit, you'll see that Dallas Goedert's actually one of my guys on the site.
Dallas guys.
Dallas Goedert is a freaking stud,
Dallas
dude.
Goedert.
So I think that he's got what it takes to be a top tight end in the league, no doubt. I mean, just when he gets that opportunity, he's elite. I do, however, think that he just happens to find himself in a situation where there are 2 alpha wide receivers in that same offense. And I do believe in Javonte Smith. So I think that that's the ultimate question there with Dallas Goedert. And if you look at the games last year where Goedert played, it's not encouraging. There's definitely some lower targeted games, and I think that I'm definitely drafting him. Like I said, he's absolutely one of my guys, and I think that I've been clamoring with Billy for us to rank him higher. We have him as our tight end 7. I think that you could easily make the case he should be ranked ahead of Pitts as the tight end 5. And I think in our dynasty rankings, he's also pretty high up there.
You're talking about the best ball rankings?
Well, best ball and I'm saying dynasty too. I mean, he's just an elite asset because we know he's a good football player first and foremost, and the Eagles offense is one we're going to believe in for years to come. And I think, things could break the right way for him, where we know he has the talent to be a Mark Andrews or Travis Kelce type in the offense. And I think those are the kind of players you just want to be drafting, who we know are just damn good football players.
And to answer your question, Chris, I'm like, are we in or out on Dallas Goedert? I'm looking at my exposure rates and they can't lie. I've got him on 5% of teams. I haven't really been in on Dallas Goedert, but you got me thinking when you're talking about just this wide range of ADP outcomes, because I'm looking on Underdog at all the players that are kind of grouped around his ADP, and I don't really recall choosing Jahan Dotson over Dallas Goedert, for instance, or Jordan Addison before getting in trouble with the law before Dallas Goedert. So I kind of find that I must be lower on him, but it's more so that people that I've been drafting with are so much higher on Dallas Goedert and taking him above his current ADP of 74.7. But I will say, in looking at just other roster construction there, for me, it's hard to take Dallas Goedert when I know that, hey, that next round, Darren Waller looks pretty attractive, but Dallas Goedert's got a lot of positives on his profile. He's super efficient, and I kind of get the George Kittle vibe from Dallas Goedert, where the profile is going to look super awesome for analytics, that it's maybe not as helpful in fantasy football, mainly due to he's a really good tight end. I mean, he's on the field 90% of the time. That's number 3 for snap share for tight ends. But I was looking at just best ball points added. And granted, these are totals. I didn't mark down the games as well. But last season, he was number 12 in best ball points added. He only played 12 games. The season before, he was number 7 in best ball points added in 15 games. Number 11 the year before, but he played 11 games. And the year before that was before his big breakout. He was number 20 in 15 games. It's some of that could be the circumstance of just not playing a full season, which that is alarming. We've talked about James Conner before having trouble with health. I mean, Dallas Goedert can't seem to stay healthy for a full season as well. But, I question what the true ceiling for Dallas Goedert is, because, I think it's fair to say probably not going to get a 17-game season for a guy that's always missed at least 2 games. And even then, it's not quite the ceiling that makes a difference at his draft costs. I'd rather wait on tight ends. I think that Dallas Goedert kind of falls in that tight end dead zone. It's either you get Kelce, you get Mark Andrews, or you just wait. You wait and get those guys that slip into the double-digit rounds at best ball, because we know one of those double-digit round guys will finish top 5. Hello, Evan Ingram last season. So with Goedert, it's good profile, but I don't know if he really helps in best ball.
I agree with you that structurally it's a bit of an odd place where you're not usually looking to draft a tight end there at the early 7th round, turn of the 6th. I think that's the biggest point against him, but I think that I'm still in on him. You want to draft players like him with his profile, and like you said, football season is just generally unpredictable. I think if anything were to happen to either of AJ Brown or Javonte Smith, Dallas Goedert pretty easily becomes a top 4 tight end any given week. And I think that's something that you want to have in your arsenal.
Yeah, it's that's exactly the point. And you know what, Dario? I was gonna bring up that your original take was very situation based, and then Aaron really got you riled up, and now you were like, forget the situation. This is a talented player, and you have to invest in those. And that's what I was gonna say. I was gonna be like, I agree with Dario, but you brought up hesitancy because of the situation. See, we try to be very situation agnostic because predicting situations is a fool's game. What if this is the season Dallas Goedert plays all 17 games and it's the season where AJ Brown misses time and now there's more available red zone opportunities and Goedert does reach that ceiling? Because, I mean, you can't say the guy's untalented. 6'5", 256, runs a 4.69. That's the size speed you want. In the 5 seasons, at least has been top 12 in PPR points per game. I mean, in total fantasy. PPR points per game, despite not playing them all. I mean, these are very good numbers in terms of targets and yardage for a tight end. The problem really has just been touchdowns. I mean, last season, 3rd in snap share, near 20% target share. He was running a ton of routes. He had good air yards. He had good receiving yards. He had 425 yards after the catch. I mean, he's not Zach Ertz, right? He had 3 total touchdowns. That's a killer at tight end, especially in half PPR for a position that relies so heavily on touchdown scoring to skew totals. Like Taysom Hill and his freak touchdown weeks made him more valuable than Dallas Goedert last year. No one could have predicted that, right? At least not accurately without it just being a wild guess. Yards per reception, yards per target led, tight ends. Yards per route run. Now, you would like to see a higher best ball points added, but again, that's touchdowns. So I'd say it's a little bit of what you both said. In regards to like the price, he does slide. See, because the problem is there's like Dallas Goedert zealots that just want to take him in the 5th round. There's people that draft Jalen Hurts but don't get AJ Brown or Devontae Smith, so they reach on him. And then there's sane people who want to take him but also want better ADP value. And then there's people that just won't touch him. So if you're in a draft full of people that just won't touch him, you can get great value on Goedert. And because of the positional upside of tight end, and whatever tight end crushes it in those final weeks is the guy you want. A 7th round pick for Goedert. Philadelphia has a very easy fantasy playoff schedule, and they're very much going to be competing for that 1 seed. And they're going to want to win those games. And you never know who's healthy or not during those weeks. In terms of receiver, there's still a lot of high upside receivers I would like, but it doesn't kill you in most team builds to pass on receiver at that point. Most people already have 3. He certainly gives you more positional upside than the running backs. And the only thing that makes Goedert tough to draft is Deshaun Watson going like so much lower. But that makes a lot of players tough to draft because Deshaun Watson is just a steal at his cost. If Watson was like the pick before Goedert, like if Watson's off the board and Goedert's still there, you're taking Dallas Goedert. You just are. You're taking your chance to get him. So I don't think you should be overlooking the talent as much, Aaron. I think functionally in terms of best ball game theory, you're spot on. But I think Dario's spot on for talent. I will call this one a draw, and we'll move on unless there's a hill either of you want to die on.
Before we move on, actually, I need one thing that I've been saying with every time the Eagles come up this offseason, I just feel like I have to point out the fact that their game script last year was a massive anomaly. I mean, you talk about strength of schedule. They had a cakewalk on their way to starting out 8-0, and the Eagles are just going to have to throw more this year. It's pretty much impossible for them to be as run heavy as they were last year. So I think that there's definitely room for Goedert, AJ Brown, Devontae Smith, even DeAndre Swift as a pass catcher. All of the Eagles pass catchers, I think, are going to have way higher ceilings this year. And there's going to be games where the Eagles have to air it out more than they did last year. And I mean, I'm excited to see those. I think all these guys are super talented weapons.
It's spot on. That's a great point. This is why we couldn't have stat masters without Dario. He is the heart and soul. We'll go on. I think we've landed on Goedert. Talented player, should still be trusted. He looks very good for 0.0 years old. And we'll move on to Dallas, our last team for NFC East. And we've pretty much hammered CeeDee Lamb and Tony Pollard all offseason on this show. And we've even talked about Malik Davis, how I think people who think Zeke is going back are crazy. It's all Malik Davis. One guy we really haven't talked about that I think is very relevant is Brandin Cooks. And one of the first shows we did for Statmasters, me and Aaron broke down aging veteran receivers and the concept of them hitting a mini production cliff before they hit a major one. And that being one of your telltale signs of when to start expecting less. So at his current cost, Brandin Cooks, he's normally an 8th round pick, 7th to 8th round, depends on the sensibilities of your draft room. His ADP is 84.8. He's wide receiver 43. Not expensive among receivers, but certainly expensive in general, firmly entrenched in the top 100. Are you guys still confident that you can get a high-end receiver production out of Brandin Cooks, or is he going to look washed this year?
I think Brandin Cooks is going to bring an element to this Cowboys offense that they desperately needed last year. CeeDee Lamb, as good as he is not a deep threat. Michael Gallup, I think, hasn't fully recovered from that injury. If you look at, for example, the advanced ESPN and 538 receiver scores, you can see that Michael Gallup has still not quite been back to his former self. And I think the departure of Dalton Schultz opens up that piece of the target pie. I mean, basically, when we're doing projections this season, you can practically take Schultz's, I think, roughly 18-20% that you would be projecting him for, and most of those targets translate pretty nicely to Brandin Cooks. My concern with the Cowboys offense this year, though, is Kellen Moore is gone, and Mike McCarthy has been very vocal about not wanting to have a good offense, which is pretty ridiculous. I don't know if you guys have been seeing those quotes, but I guess he wasn't happy with just how pass heavy they've been in the past. And I think that's my concern with this team as a whole. But I think that he's still a decent value where he's going. And I mean, I think that, you said there's a little age cliff possibly, but I think that last year he just wasn't happy with the situation in Houston. He wanted to get traded. The team wouldn't trade him. Kind of a messy thing on both sides. And I think he's still got what it takes to play ball. He's still got the speed. And he will always be the guy that caught the touchdown that ended up giving the Panthers the number 1 pick, or robbing the Texans of the number 1 pick for Bryce Young. So good for him on that.
Yeah, Brandin Cooks. Well, Chris and I did a whole Dallas Cowboys show earlier this summer, but Brandin Cooks, I have some hesitancy. Some of that is going okay. With his age, he's starting to get up there a little bit. And Brandin Cooks is a funny player in fantasy football in that he performs well when the masses aren't on him, as Chris has pointed out before. Like really, when Chris talks, that's when we should list about Brandin Cooks, because when he says to draft him, those are the years that you should have drafted him. And when he says to avoid Brandin Cooks, that's when you avoid him. And the cost is getting up there. And I'm actually looking too at Player Profiler's underdog rankings. And when we compare Dallas Goedert to Brandin Cooks, the rankings are a lot higher on Brandin Cooks. They've got him inside the top 70 overall, and his ADP is inside the top 85, just barely. But for me, in more of a best ball strategy thing is when you look at all the players across all positions, like he's sandwiched between running backs that I don't mind taking stabs on, like Javonte Williams, who we've talked about earlier. I don't mind taking a flyer on him. Even, this kills me to say on the microphone, but Rachaad White, because this is the round to usually take your third running back instead of a wide receiver that I don't know how much he helps. And I know it's situation, but the Cowboys, the moves they have made, they don't want to be, Dario, you mentioned this, they don't care about being a top-notch offense. They really don't. Their identity last season is we're a really good defensive team. That's how they stayed in the games with Dak Prescott throwing so many interceptions. They want to keep the ball on the ground. And I don't know how big the target share is going to be for Brandin Cooks. Like you mentioned that 18 to 20%, and I go, that's probably fair. And I think it's closer to that 18% because CeeDee Lamb's going to get his. I think it's okay. It might sound ridiculous, but a 30% target share is not that far out of the question for CeeDee Lamb, who flirted with it last year. And Tony Pollard is going to get more work in the passing game. Chris and I firmly believe that no Kellen Moore throwing deep, that there's going to be more dump off passes to Tony Pollard, who I think going off memory was like 8.6%. We bump him up a little bit. It's just hard to envision a 20% target share for Brandin Cooks when looking at this Cowboys offense last year. Dalton Schultz was number 2 in target share, and he didn't even get 20%. So an offense that I feel can sustain CeeDee Lamb, Tony Pollard, but I don't know if it can sustain Brandin Cooks at his current ADP when people are also fading Dak Prescott. Just the stuff doesn't make sense with ADP trends there. But for me, I'm out on Cooks, and even just looking at his most recent seasons, we've seen that yards per reception take a 2-year drop. And Chris and I have looked at other players this summer too, where that's usually the warning sign, is when like the efficiency does drop. That's the red flag. So for Brandin Cooks, I'm out on him this year.
I mean, I think we see an efficiency drop. Dario's point to the role available certainly builds confidence. Michael Gallup, I agree. I think is an easy fade at his cost. Too much concern with repeat injury. And you're right, Dario. He's certainly not on track as people like to pretend he is. And there is a clear role here for Cooks. I think you actually made a very good case for this being a player that's better in best ball than conventional, where you have to set a lineup. It's going to be very hard to know. Yeah, it can be very hard to know. I think we do see an efficiency decline. Now, yards per reception stays. Fantasy points per game drops. To a degree, like 93 targets in 13 games isn't necessarily the same pace that he had the year prior, but it's career average pace, so I'll give him that. Advanced stats and metrics, not necessarily impressive, but I'll also give him some credence to injury. But injury at an extended age is also concerning. A calf strain that costs you 4 weeks. I think the real thing with Cooks is just price. It's like Aaron said, there's good running backs there. I still want Deshaun Watson, and I'll still take stabs on Elijah Moore and Zay Flowers. I have 5 Brandin Cooks in 105 Best Ball Mania 4-4 drafts. It's about 4.5%. And I think that's a reasonable number. I get him when he falls. I don't think he's undraftable. And I think there's room for him in this Cowboys offense. It's just, so Brandin, I would call it nearly the correct price. Maybe if his ADP was like 90. The thing is, in past years, we've had round 8 Brandin Cooks where it was screaming value. It's like, hey, like he just needs to hit half his ceiling as clear-cut wide receiver 1 in Houston. Doesn't matter who the quarterback is a great pick in the 8th round. Then last year jumps to the 5th round and fails to meet that expectation. But now he's back to the 8th round. But that's only because of the failure to meet the expectation. There's no additional counting for the age and potential production drop-off. So where 8th round Brandin Cooks was a screaming value in the past, he's now just an okay pick. And for just an okay pick, I'm not going to go crazy for you. I'll pepper you in. If he could catch a big touchdown against the Lions in week 17, you certainly want him. But I don't see him being a high advance rate player. Very flash week kind of guy. I'll take him at a discount. Before we wrap up the NFC East, though, and the Cowboys, you guys both made reference to the offense, the coaching, and its ability to affect the fantasy scoring here. Again, I'm never going to dive into a coach-centric analysis like that. I think the Kellen Moore hype is massively overrated. It's so funny that the last couple of years, the amount of insults slung towards the Cowboys offense, their inability to sustain drives, their inability to maximize their ceiling, so on and so forth. And then Kellen Moore leaves. Mike McCarthy, with the worst words possible, says that he just wants to play a little bit more old school football and game manage a little bit more, which is what the Patriots did to win 7 Super Bowls. And everyone now is, Kellen Moore is great, and the Cowboys themselves are the problem. What if Kellen Moore was part of the problem? What if we're overrating this whole situation? And what if, like we've always known for all time, at the end of the day, it comes down to the talent on the field? And give me Dak, give me Nick Martin, give me Tyron Smith, give me CeeDee Lamb, even give me Brandin Cooks, give me Tony Pollard. Just give me those guys. And even if there's slightly less volume, what about just very high quality passing efficiency? You don't need all the volume in the world. Kirk Cousins and the Vikings don't lead the league in passing volume. They're not the Tampa Bay Buccaneers last year.
I don't know. This tangent you're going on is.
I'm just saying.
I think
it a lot.
Kellen Moore is a big part of the reason that offense worked the way it did. If you look at the way that it shifted once he became the offensive coordinator, and if you look at, I think that Mike McCarthy is. I mean, they hired. You know who their offensive coordinator is going to be this year? It's Brian Schottenheimer.
What's wrong with Schottenheimer? You don't like Schotty?
Shoddy nuked Russ. I mean, you remember let Russ cook the days of the run heavy Seahawks offenses. I think that's the biggest concern here. Although, I mean, taking a closer look at some of the key per route stats from Brandin Cooks last year, his target rate did decline from like about 27% in 2021 to 23.5% last year. It's a little concerning. His yards per route run dropped below 2.0 after he's consistently been a guy who's above that mark, 2 yards per route run. It's a pretty clear indicator of an elite receiver. So I think that there's actually some slightly concerning signs there with the age cliff. And then, whether we choose to write that off because of the situation in Houston last year, just while we were sitting here on the show, it kind of made me think back to the Allen Robinson situation last year, where everyone wrote off the fact that he'd had a down year in Chicago because of his motivation on that team. And I don't know, that's just the dot that I connected while we were sitting here talking. And that does make me a little bit more concerned. But I mean, Allen Robinson last year was going in the 3rd round, Brandin Cooks going in the 7th or 8th. I think you definitely take your stabs on them. And keep in mind, Dak Prescott's like the 2nd best quarterback in the NFC right now. So I think that they're still going to have an elite offense. Overall, I just think that the volume is going to be down because Kellen Moore is gone. And that risk of, him being a little bit past the age cliff, I think is factored in already.
Thanks for joining us on Stat Masters, your go-to for fantasy football insights. From player analysis to breakdowns, we've empowered you to dominate your leagues. Stay subscribed for cutting-edge analysis to keep you ahead of the competition. Keep the conversation going, stay passionate, focused, and victorious. This is Stat Masters signing off.
Hey, you like that video? Be sure to subscribe and activate those alerts so you get notified as soon as new videos drop. And be sure to check out PlayerProfiler.com. We have all the tools for you to dominate every type of fantasy league. We have a draft kit, Dynasty Deluxe, data analysis, DFS Dominator, and don't forget the player rankings to rule them all.